and shalom, and welcome to Cover to Cover.
Yep.
With, sorry, my hat's crooked. With Jeremy Pyers.
And Callan Pyers.
So,
Let's get started.
today we're going to be doing part 2. Wow, why does it look so crooked? Crazy.
Yeah.
It's not. Weird.
Okay.
Anyway, we're going to be doing part 12 of the Book of Enoch today.
Yep. And today should be a good video.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully they all are. And I hope you guys are learning a lot, because I know I am as well.
Make sure play to Yahweh.
Let's see. So we're going to be starting at chapter 85 today.
Yep.
Excuse me.
So it should be a good video today.
Alright.
Let's get started.
Alright, so the Book of Enoch, chapter 85, read from the Eth Sefer. After this, I saw another dream, and explained it all to my son, explained it all to you, my son. Enoch arose, and said to his son Methuselah, "To you, my son, will I speak. Hear my word, and incline your ear to the visionary dream of your father. Before I married your mother Edna, I saw a vision in my bed. And behold, a cow sprung forth from the earth, and this cow was white. Afterwards, a female heifer sprung forth, and with it another heifer. The one was black, and one was red. The black heifer then struck the red one, and pursued it over the earth. From that period, I could see nothing more of the red heifer, but the black one increased in bulk, and a female heifer came with him. After this, I saw that many cows proceeded forth, resembling him, and following after him. The first female, young one, also went out in the presence of the first cow, and sought the red heifer, but found him not. And she lamented with a great lamentation, while she was seeking him. Then I looked until that first cow came to her, from which time she became silent, and ceased to lament. Afterwards, she calved another white cow, and again calved many cows, and black heifers. In my sleep also I perceived a white bull, which in like manner grew, and became a large white bull.
Yep.
After him, many white cows came forth, resembling him, and they began to calve many white cows, which resembled them, and followed each other. So pretty interesting here, kind of showing a little significance to the red heifer.
Yep. Okay. So, is this next?
Chapter 86. Again, I looked attentively while sleeping, and surveyed heaven above, and behold, a single star fell from heaven, which being raised up, ate and fed among those cows. After that, I perceived other large and black cows, and behold, all of them changed their stalls and pastures, while they were young, began to lament one with another. Again I looked in my vision, and surveyed heaven, which behold I saw many stars, which descended and projected themselves from heaven to where was the first star. Into the midst of those young ones, while the cows were with them, feeding in the midst of them, I looked at and observed them, when behold they all acted after the manner of horses, and began to approach the young cows, all of whom became pregnant, and brought forth elephants, camels, and asses. At these all the cows were alarmed and terrified, when they began biting with their teeth, swallowing and striking with their horns. They began also to devour the cows. And behold, all the children of the earth trembled, shook with terror at them, and suddenly fled away. In chapter 87. Again I perceived them when they began to strike and to swallow each other, and the earth cried out. Then I raised my eyes a second time towards heaven, and saw in a vision that, behold, there came forth from heaven, as it were, the likeliness of white men. One came forth from thence, and 3 with him. Those 3 who came forth last seized me by my hand, and raised me up from the generations of the earth, elevated to me to a high station. Then they showed me a lofty tower on the earth, while every hill became diminished. And they said, Remain here until you perceive what shall come upon those elephants, camels, and asses, upon the stars, and upon all the cows. Chapter 88. And then I looked at that one of the 4 who came forth first. He seized the first star which fell down from heaven, and binding it hand and foot, he cast it into a valley narrow, deep, stupendous, and gloomy. Then one of them drew his sword, and gave it to the elephants, camels, and asses, who began to strike each other, and the whole earth shook on account of them. And when I looked in the vision, behold, one of those 4 angels who came forth, hurled from heaven, collected together, and took all the great stars, whose from partially resembles that of horses, and binding them all hand and foot, cast them into the cavities of the earth. Chapter 89. Then one of those 4 went to the white cows, and taught them a mystery. While the cow was trembling, it was born, and became a man, and fabricated for himself a large ship. In this he dwelt, and 3 cows dwelt with him in that ship, which covered them. Again I lifted up my eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof. Above it there was 7 cataracts, which poured forth on a certain village much water. Again I looked and beheld there were fountains open on the earth in that large village. The water began to boil up, and rose over the earth, so that the village was not seen, while its whole soil was covered with water. Much water was over it, darkness and clouds. Then I surveyed the height of this water, and it was elevated above the village. It flowed over the village, and stood higher than the earth. Then all the cows which were collected there, while I looked on them, were drowned, swallowed up, and destroyed in the water. So in case you didn't know, this was the vision given by Yah to Enoch about Noah's flood. But the ship floated above it. All the cows, the elephants, the camels, and the asses were drowned on the earth, and all cattle, nor could I perceive them. Neither were they able to get out, but perished and sunk into the deep. Again I looked into the vision until those cataracts from that lofty roof were removed, and the fountains of the earth became equalized, while the other depths were open, into which the water began to descend, until the dry ground appeared. The ship remained on the earth. The darkness receded, and it became light. Then the white cow, which became a man, went out of the ship, and the 3 cows with him. And one of the 3 cows was white, resembling that cow. One of them was red as blood, and one of them was black. And the white cow left them. Then began wild beasts and birds to bring forth. Of all these the different kinds assembled together: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, wild boars, foxes, rabbits, and the hanzar, the sisset, the aves, kites, the foncas, and ravens. And the white cow was born in the midst of them, and they began to bite each other. When the white cow, which was born in the midst of them, brought forth a wild ass and a white cow at the same time, and many wild asses. Then the white cow which was born brought forth from a black wild sow and a white sheep. That wild sow also brought forth many swine. And that sheep brought forth 12 sheep. When those 12 sheep grew up, they delivered one of them to the asses. Again, those asses delivered that sheep to the wolves, and he grew up in the midst of them. Then Yahuwah brought the 11 sheep, that they might dwell and feed with him in the midst of the wolves. So this is the story of Joseph in Egypt and the patriarchs. They multiplied, and there was an abundance of pasture for them. But the wolves began to frighten and oppress them, while they destroyed their young ones. And they left their young in torrents of deep water. Now the sheep began to cry out on account of their young, and fled for refuge to their Adonai. One, however, which was saved, escaped, and went away to the wild asses. I beheld the sheep moaning, crying, and petitioning their Adonai with all their might, until Yahuwah of the sheep descended at their voice from their lofty habitation, went to them, and inspected them. He called to that sheep which had secretly stolen away from the wolves, and told him to make the wolves understand that they were not to touch the sheep. Then that sheep went to the wolves with the word of Yahweh. When another met him, and proceeded with him, both of them together entered the dwelling of the wolves, and conversing with them, made them understand that henceforward they were not to touch the sheep. Afterwards I perceived the wolves greatly prevailing over the sheep with their whole force. The sheep cried out, and their Adonai came to them. He began to strike the wolves, who commenced a grievous lamentation. But the sheep were silent, nor from that time did they cry out. Then I Then I looked at them until they departed from the wolves. The eyes of the wolves were blind, who went out and followed them with all their might. But Yahuwah of the sheep proceeded with them and conducted them. All his sheep followed him. His countenance, terrific and splendid and glorious, was his aspect. Yet the wolves began to follow the sheep, until they overtook them in a certain lake of water. I'm sure you guys realize what this is beginning to describe. Then that lake became divided, the water standing up on both sides before their face. And while their Adonai was conducting them, he placed himself between them and the wolves. The wolves, however, perceived not the sheep, but went into the midst of the lake, following them and running after them into that lake of water. But when they saw Yahuwah of the sheep, they turned to fly from before his face. Then the water of the lake returned, and that suddenly, according to its nature, it became full, and was raised up, until it covered the wolves. And I saw that all of them which had followed the sheep perished, and were drowned. So yeah, you gotta remember, this was all written well before even Noah. So him describing Moses and Aaron and the exodus of Egypt is pretty amazing as well. But the sheep passed over this water, proceeding to a wilderness, which was without both water and grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. Then I beheld Yahuwah of the sheep inspecting them, and giving them water and grass. The sheep was proceeding and conducting them. And when he had ascended to the top of the lofty rock, Yahuwah of the sheep sent him to them. Afterwards I perceived their Adonai standing before them, with an aspect terrific and severe. And when they all beheld him, they were frightened at his countenance. All of them were alarmed and trembled. They cried out after that sheep, and to the other sheep who had been with him, and who was in the midst of them, saying, We are not able to stand before our Adonai, or to look upon him.
Yep.
Then that sheep who conducted them went away, and ascended to the top of the rock. When the sheep began to grow blind, and to wander from the path which he had shown them, but he knew it not.
Yep.
And their Adonai, however, was moved with great indignation against them. And when that sheep had learned, he descended from the top of the rock, and coming to them,
Yep.
found that there were many which had become blind,
Yep.
and had wandered from his path. As soon as they beheld him, they feared and trembled at his presence, and they became desirous of returning to their fold. Then that sheep, taking with him other sheep, went to those which had wandered, and afterwards began to kill them. They were terrified at his countenance. Then he caused those which had wandered to return, who went back to their fold. I likewise saw there in the vision that this sheep became a man, built a house for Yahuwah of the sheep, and made them all stand in the house. I perceived also that the sheep which proceeded to meet this sheep, their conductor, died. I saw too that all the great sheep perished, while smaller ones rose up in their place, entered into a pasture, and approached a river of water. Then that sheep was their conductor, who became a man, was separated from them, and died. All the sheep sought after him, and cried for him with bitter lamentation. I saw likewise that they ceased to cry after that sheep, and passed over the river of water, and that there arose other sheep, all of whom conducted them, instead of those who were dead, and who had conducted them. Then I saw that the sheep entered into a goodly place, and a territory delectable and glorious. I saw also that they became satiated, that their house was in the midst of a delectable territory,
Yep.
and that sometimes their eyes were open, and that sometimes they were blind, until another sheep arose and conducted them. He brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. Then dogs and foxes and wild boars began to devour them, until again another sheep arose, the Adonai of the flock, one of themselves, a ram, to conduct them. This ram began to butt on every side of those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, until they all perished. With his eyes he saw the ram in the midst of them, who had laid aside his glory. And he began to strike the sheep, treading upon them, and behaving himself without dignity. Then their Adonai sent a sheep to a still different sheep, and raised him up to be a ram, and to conduct them instead of that sheep, who had laid aside his glory. Going therefore to him, and conversing with him alone, he raised up that ram, and made him a prince, the leader of the flock, all the time that the dogs troubled the sheep. The first ram paid respect to this later ram. Then the later ram arose, and fled away from before his face. And I saw that those dogs caused the first ram to fall. But the latter ram arose, and conducted the smaller sheep. That ram likewise begat many sheep, and died. Then there was a smaller sheep, a ram, instead of him, which became a prince and a leader, conducting the flock. And the sheep increased in size and multiplied, and all the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled away from him. That ram also struck and killed all the wild beasts, so that they could not again prevail in the midst of the sheep, nor at any time ever snatch them away. And that house was made large and wide, a lofty tower being built upon it by the sheep, for Yahweh of the sheep. The house was low, but the tower was elevated and very high. Then Yahweh of the sheep stood upon that tower, and caused a full table to approach before him. Again I saw those sheep wandered, and went various ways, forsaking that their house. And that their Adonai called to some among them, who he had sent to them. But these the sheep began to kill, and when one of them was saved from the slaughter, he leaped and cried out against those who were desirous of killing him. But Yahweh of the sheep delivered him from their hands, and made him ascend to him, and remained with him. He sent also many others to them to testify, and with lamentation to exclaim against them. So this is basically going through the Old Testament. And again I saw, when some of them forsook the house of their Adonai, and this tower, wandering on all sides, and growing blind. I saw that Yahweh of the sheep made a great slaughter among them in their pasture, until they cried out to him in consequence of that slaughter. Then he departed from that place of his habitation, and left them in the power of lions, tigers, wolves, and the hyenas, and in the power of foxes and every beast. And the wild beasts began to tear them. I saw too that he forsook the house of their fathers, and their tower, giving them all into the power of lions, to tear and devour them. into the power of every beast. Then I began to cry out with all my might, imploring Yahweh of the sheep, and showing him how the sheep were devoured by all the beasts of prey. But he looked on in silence, rejoicing that they were devoured, swallowed up, and carried off, and leaving them in the power of every beast for food. He called also 70 shepherds, and resigned to them the sheep, that they might overlook them. Saying to them and their associates, every one of you henceforthward overlook the sheep, and whatsoever I command you, do. And I will deliver them to you numbered. I will tell you which of them shall be slain. These destroy. And he delivered the sheep to them. Then he called to another, and said, understand and watch everything, which the shepherds shall do to these sheep. For many more of them shall perish than I have commanded. Of every excess and slaughter which the shepherds shall commit, there shall be an account, as how many have perished by my command, and how many of them have destroyed. They may have destroyed of their own heads. Of all the destruction by each of the shepherds, there shall be an account, and according to that number, I will cause a recital to be made before me, how many they have destroyed of their own heads, and how many they have delivered up to destruction, that I may have this testimony against them, that I may know all their proceedings, and that, delivering to them, I may see what they will do, whether they will act as I have commanded them or not. However, they shall be ignorant, neither shall you make any explanation to them, neither shall you reprove them, but there shall be an account of all the destruction done by them in their respective seasons. Then they began to kill and destroy more than it was commanded them. And they left the sheep in the power of the lions, so that very many of them were devoured and swallowed up by lions and tigers, and wild boars preyed upon them. That tower they burnt, and overthrew that house. Then I grieved extremely on account of the tower, and because the house of the sheep was overthrown. Neither was I afterwards able to perceive whether they again entered that house. The shepherds likewise, and their associates, delivered them to all the wild beasts, that they might devour them. Each of them in his season, according to his number, was delivered up. Each of them, one with another, was described in the Sefer. How many of them, one with another, were destroyed in the Sefer? More, however, than was ordered, everyone killed and destroyed. Then I began to weep, and was greatly indignant on account of the sheep. In like manner, I also saw in the vision him who wrote, how he wrote down one destroyed by the shepherds every day. He ascended, remained, and exhibited each of his Sepharim to Yahweh of the sheep, all which they had done, and all which each of them had made away with, and all which they had delivered up to destruction. He took the Sefer up in his hands, read it, sealed it, and deposited it After this I saw shepherds overlooking for 12 hours. And behold, 3 of the sheep departed, arrived, went in, and began building all that was fallen down of the house. But the wild boars hindered them, although they prevailed not. Again they began to build as before, and raised up that tower, which was called a lofty tower. And again they began to place before the tower a table, with every impure and unclean kind of bread upon it. Moreover, also all the sheep were blind and could not see, as were the shepherds likewise. Thus they were delivered up to the shepherds for a great destruction, who trod them under foot and devoured them. Yet their Adonai silent, until all the sheep in the field were destroyed. The shepherds and the sheep were all mixed together, but they did not save them from the power of the beasts. Then he who wrote the Sefer ascended, exhibited it, and read it at the residence of Yahweh of the sheep. He petitioned him for them, and prayed, pointing out every act of the shepherds, and testifying before him against them all. Then taking the Sefer, he deposited it with him, and departed. Whew, that 89 was quite the long one.
Yep. At least we finished all the pages.
Yep, so we'll pause it there
Yep.
at chapter 90 for this evening.
Yep, because that was the last page.
So anyways, yeah, this part in Enoch, it's pretty much describing, what's written in the Old Testament from.
Yep.
And the amazing part is, Enoch wrote all this down way before Noah, obviously.
Hello for free.
It just goes to show how amazing and how this book, it does line up with scriptures, and how it lines up and just gives more detail,
Just for 99 cents.
Anyways, thank you for joining me this evening.
Hello, just for 99
Please like
cents
and
$0.
share and subscribe if you liked it, and I would really appreciate it. It helps, get it out there.
Share is
And
good,
it's like I say every time, test everything to his word for yourself with fasting and prayer. That's, follow no man. That's all we can do, is just follow follow his word, and do our best to search out what is the truth and follow it.
Hello for free. Take $0.99, and it's even comes still too.
Sure. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me. I hope to see you next weekend.
Yep. When we have find the next Bible, because that was the last page, because I saw it on that thing.
Anyways, I hope you guys have a blessed evening and a blessed week.
Yep.
And
remember, Yahuwah.
yes, remember Yahweh and everything. That's right. All right, we'll see you guys. We'll see you all. Have a blessed week, and shalom, shalom, shalom.
Bye.